Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Long before Europe emerged from the shadows of late antiquity, before medieval cathedrals rose above Roman ruins, and before the debates of councils defined orthodox belief for much of the Christian world, the highlands of Ethiopia had already woven Christianity into the fabric of their civilization. Isolated by geography yet connected by ancient trade routes, Ethiopia became a living archive of early Christian thought. Within its monasteries, caves, and royal libraries, texts were preserved that vanished elsewhere, texts copied in the ancient language of Ge'ez, read by monks whose traditions stretched back to the earliest centuries of the faith. Among these writings are works that speak of the end of time, the rise of evil, and the figure later known across Christendom as the Antichrist. What Ethiopia's hidden books say about the Antichrist is not a tale of sensational horror or crude fear, but a layered and deeply theological vision shaped by Jewish apocalyptic roots, early Christian struggles, and a uniquely African understanding of cosmic order, kingship, and moral decay. To understand these texts, one must first understand Ethiopia's place in religious history. Christianity reached the kingdom of Aksum in the 4th century through figures such as Frumentius, later known as Abba Salama, who became the first bishop of Ethiopia. By the time the Roman Empire was still debating Christological doctrine, Ethiopia had already accepted Christianity as a state religion. Crucially, Ethiopia's church developed somewhat independently from both Rome and Constantinople, especially after the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE, which the Ethiopian church did not accept. This separation meant that Ethiopian Christianity preserved older traditions that were later marginalized or declared apocryphal elsewhere. Among these traditions is the Ethiopian biblical canon, the largest and most expansive of any Christian tradition. While most Western Christians are familiar with a Bible of 66 books, and Eastern Orthodox Christians with slightly more, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church recognizes 81 books. Some of these, such as the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and 4 Ezra, disappeared from most Christian canons but survive intact in Ethiopia. These writings form the backbone of Ethiopia's distinctive vision of the Antichrist. The Ethiopian understanding of the Antichrist draws heavily from apocalyptic literature that predates Christianity itself. Jewish apocalyptic thought, developed during periods of foreign domination such as the Babylonian exile and the Seleucid persecutions, imagine history as a battleground between divine order and corrupt earthly powers. Texts like Daniel introduce the idea of monstrous rulers who embody rebellion against God. In Ethiopia, these ideas were not merely inherited but expanded upon. The Book of Enoch, preserved in full only in Ge'ez manuscripts, is central to this worldview. Though Enoch does not use the term Antichrist explicitly, it lays the conceptual foundation for the figure. Enoch speaks of fallen angels who corrupt humanity, teach forbidden knowledge, and establish systems of violence and deception. The judgment of these beings and of the kings who follow their ways foreshadows later descriptions of a final enemy who unites political power, spiritual deception, and moral chaos. Ethiopian tradition often interprets the Antichrist not as an isolated invention of the New Testament era, but as the culmination of patterns already present since the fall of the Watchers. In Ethiopian readings of Enoch, evil does not arise suddenly at the end of time. It grows slowly, nourished by injustice, false wisdom, and the abandonment of divine law. The Antichrist, therefore, is not merely a villain but the final expression of humanity's long rebellion. This differs subtly from later Western depictions that focus on a single tyrant appearing abruptly. Ethiopian texts emphasize continuity, portraying the Antichrist as the final fruit of a corrupted world system. Another critical source is the Book of Jubilees, also preserved in Ethiopia. Jubilees retells Genesis and Exodus with a strong emphasis on divine law, cosmic order, and calendrical purity. Within its framework, evil powers are permitted to test humanity, but remain under God's ultimate control. The figure of Mastema, a satanic adversary who accuses and tempts, plays a significant role. Ethiopian interpreters often link Mastema's influence to the rise of end-time deception. The Antichrist, in this view, operates not independently, but as an agent allowed for a time to reveal the true loyalties of humanity. Ethiopian apocalyptic literature also includes texts such as 4 Ezra, known in Ethiopia as Ezra's Sutual. This work grapples with the problem of evil, the suffering of the righteous, and the fate of oppressive rulers. Its visions of a final judgment and a messianic figure who destroys a wicked kingdom deeply influenced Ethiopian eschatology. In Ethiopian tradition, the Antichrist stands in direct opposition to the true Messiah, not merely mimicking Christ, but attempting to overturn divine justice itself. Yet, unlike later medieval European traditions obsessed with identifying the Antichrist with specific popes or emperors, Ethiopian texts maintain a more symbolic and moral approach. One of the most striking Ethiopian contributions to Antichrist tradition appears in later Ge'ez writings such as the Fker Iasis, a medieval Ethiopian apocalyptic text that reflects both biblical prophecy and Ethiopian political experience. This work describes a time of great tribulation when false rulers arise, churches are corrupted, and truth is mocked. The Antichrist figure here is deeply connected to injustice, exploitation of the poor, and the betrayal of sacred trust. He is not simply an enemy of doctrine, but an enemy of righteousness. His reign is marked by the collapse of ethical order, where wealth replaces virtue and power replaces humility. In Ethiopian imagination, the Antichrist often emerges during periods of social upheaval. Ethiopia's long history of warfare, dynastic struggles, and foreign invasions shaped its apocalyptic outlook. The Antichrist becomes a mirror reflecting fears of tyranny and moral decay. Yet these texts never allow despair to dominate. They consistently emphasize that the Antichrist's power is temporary, permitted only for the testing of the faithful. Another distinctive element in Ethiopian tradition is the role of kingship. Ethiopian rulers historically claim descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, as recorded in the Keber Nagast, another foundational Ethiopian text. This sacred view of kingship influenced how Ethiopians understood false rulers. The Antichrist is often portrayed as a counterfeit king, someone who claims authority without divine sanction. His rule contrasts sharply with the ideal of a righteous king who upholds God's law and protects the weak. This royal imagery gives Ethiopian Antichrist narratives a political depth often absent from Western theological speculation. The Keber Nagast itself does not focus explicitly on the Antichrist, but its emphasis on covenant, legitimacy, and divine order shapes later interpretations. Any ruler who rejects these principles risks being associated with end-time deception. In this sense, the Antichrist is less a single future individual and more a category of ultimate illegitimate authority. Ethiopian homilies and commentaries further expand these ideas. Sermons attributed to early church fathers, translated into Ge'ez and preserved in Ethiopian manuscripts, often blend biblical prophecy with local interpretation. These texts describe the Antichrist as a master of illusion, capable of performing signs that deceive those who lack spiritual discernment. However, Ethiopian writers consistently stress that true believers will recognize him not by miraculous displays but by his fruits. His hatred of justice, oppression of the faithful, and mockery of sacred traditions expose his true nature. Unlike some later Christian traditions that speculate obsessively about the Antichrist's birthplace, ethnicity, or physical appearance, Ethiopian texts show restraint. They focus instead on moral and spiritual characteristics. The Antichrist is defined by deception, arrogance, and lawlessness. This approach reflects Ethiopia's deep immersion in biblical ethics rather than speculative curiosity. The Ethiopian Church's liturgical life also shaped its eschatology. Daily prayers, fasts, and festivals continually reminded believers of cosmic struggle and divine judgment. The Antichrist was not merely a topic for scholars, but a symbol invoked in sermons to warn against complacency and corruption. In this sense, the Antichrist served a pastoral function, urging vigilance and repentance rather than fear. Historically, Western scholars long dismissed Ethiopian texts as derivative or legendary. It was only in the 19th and 20th centuries, when manuscripts were studied more seriously, that their importance became clear. The discovery that the Book of Enoch survived in complete form only in Ethiopia transformed biblical scholarship. Suddenly, Ethiopian tradition was no longer peripheral, but central to understanding early Jewish and Christian thought about evil and the end times. What emerges from Ethiopia's hidden books is a vision of the Antichrist deeply rooted in ancient apocalyptic theology, yet shaped by a unique historical experience. The Antichrist is not merely a monster waiting in the future, but the ultimate expression of injustice, false authority, and spiritual blindness. He is the final test in a long history of moral struggle. Perhaps most striking is the balance Ethiopian texts maintain between warning and hope. While they speak vividly of deception and suffering, they never doubt the final triumph of divine justice. The Antichrist's defeat is certain, his reign fleeting. This confidence reflects a worldview forged through centuries of endurance, where faith survived isolation, invasion, and neglect. In a modern world fascinated by conspiracy theories and sensational prophecies, Ethiopia's ancient writings offer a sobering alternative. They remind readers that the true danger of the Antichrist lies not in dramatic spectacle, but in quiet corruption, and the gradual erosion of truth and compassion. Ethiopia's hidden books do not invite obsession with the end, but reflection on the present. Through these texts, Ethiopia speaks across centuries, offering a voice both ancient and urgent. Its vision of the Antichrist is not a relic of superstition, but a profound meditation on power, morality, and faith. In preserving these writings when others were lost, Ethiopia preserved not just books, but a way of understanding evil that remains unsettlingly relevant.